I just finished a case that I'm going to talk about today that I'm very, very excited about. Before I get to the case, quick reminder, don't forget to like us and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you are watching, so you don't miss any of our lives or other helpful content we put out there. If you find this to be helpful, or you think you know someone who might find this video helpful, please hit that share button so that others can see it as well. So today I just finished immigration court, and it was virtual, which is why I'm clearly not in an immigration court right now. But I'm very excited because we obviously won, and just got my client was just granted asylum. So he is a native and citizen of Ghana who first came to the U.S. in May 2021. So in the asylum world, about a year and a half is really quick from the time that you enter the country and the time you get your grant of asylum through the judge is crazy quick, actually. So this client, he entered at the border. So he had fled his country a few months earlier, and I'll talk about why in a second. And he couldn't get a visa to the US, so he actually flew to Brazil, which this is common for a lot of African countries, or a lot of people from Africa, because they don't necessarily need a visa to come to Brazil. And he didn't speak the language. He is a gay man. It wasn't safe for him to be there, and some of the other countries he walked through to get to the US, but really his goal was to get to the US and apply for asylum. And that's what he did. It took him a few months to get up here. When he finally got up here, he entered at the San Diego border. He intended to enter at the port of entry. But at this time, there were very long lines. I'm not sure how the lines are these days, but that was when the Remain in Mexico policies were still in effect or winding down, things like that. Actually, they were still in effect because I saw a marking on his paperwork that said he wasn't eligible to stay in Mexico. They didn't that he could be harmed. So he ended up not waiting on the line, and someone found the hole in the fence. He climbed through. A couple minutes later, CBP was there, picked him up, and he told them right away, I want to apply for asylum. He was detained, and he was given a credible fear interview. And he passed his credible fear interview. So he just needed to show that there was a credible fear that he had, were he to be returned to Ghana, that he would be harmed. So he remained in detention basically until then, and then he was able to be paroled into the United States in order to wait for his trial. So he then filed what's called a defensive asylum application. If you're in removal proceedings already, which is what happens when you're caught at the border, then you're not filing affirmatively, you're filing defensively, but you still need to file within that year. So he didn't use a lawyer for the first application, but he did get it filed within a year. And then he came to us, and we redid the application and submitted a bunch of evidence. And basically, they took away his passport. He obviously didn't have a visa. He did have his birth certificate, and this is a problem sometimes with asylum applicants. Luckily, he had his birth certificate. But we also submitted his health insurance card from Ghana that I think that everyone who's a citizen gets. So I say that just to show that when there are problems proving your identity in cases like asylum, there are other documents that can be accepted, and in the worst case scenario, it comes down to testimony or possibly expert witnesses. But we don't have to go to that extent in this case. So we submitted those things. We had him write a statement. We had a witness statement, a doctor letter, some photos of his injuries, and then of course your country condition evidence, and a membership card to the center, which is I'm not sure, it's an organization for the LGBTQI plus community, and trying to help meet some people and give him some resources as well. So he came to us and tells us a story. Essentially, what happened is when he was in high school, one of his friends was gay and kind of introduced him to it, and he realized he was gay after he was introduced to it, and he said it made him feel really happy and loved, and he had a boyfriend, and for a while his high school boyfriend, and then it all has to be hush hush in Ghana though, because in Ghana it is illegal to be gay. So the police not only will not help you or protect you if someone comes after you, they will put you in jail. And that is really scary if you're in that position. So even though he was a gay man, he couldn't really be open. He couldn't be open at all. Nobody knew except for his very close knit group of friends, maybe 3 or 4 people. So then he had another partner, and he was in his family home with his partner in his bedroom, and his uncle walked in on them, and that's when everyone found out that he was gay. And what his uncle did was locked him and his partner in the room, and then gathered up members of the family and other members of anti-LGBTQ groups. And then they unlocked the door, started beating them, dragged them out, were yelling gay slurs at them, telling them they were an abomination and they were shaming the family, beating them. And they were very lucky that him and his partner were able to get away. They ran away. But they kind of ran in separate directions, or I don't know if exactly separate directions, but they got away separately. It was kind of every man for himself at that point. So he ran to his friend's house, who lives about 10 minutes away, and no one knew where he was, but they were obviously looking for him. One sad thing about this story is that this partner that he loved, that he was with for 2 years, he's never seen again since that day. We don't know if he disappeared, if he's alive, if he's not alive. We hope he is, of course, but he cut his phone off, everything. So he goes to his friend's house, and this was back in August of 2020. And a couple of weeks later, he's walking to the market, and someone spots him that knows him. And if you don't know much about Ghana and where he's from in Ghana, which I'm not going to give a more detailed description of, but these are villages. So when you live in an area, everyone kind of knows you. It's a small community. So someone spotted him, and then all of a sudden he sees these 7 or 8 men approaching him, and he knew who they were because some of them were his family members, including that uncle that walked in on them. And they started yelling at him again, like gay slurs and he's an abomination and this and that. And then they just start beating him. And I forgot to mention, in between these 2 attacks, he had also been getting continuous phone threats, telephone calls, and text message threats that they were going to get him. So they beat him, and then all of a sudden he feels a sharp pain in his left side, and he had been stabbed, and that's when he passed out. And they left him for dead on the side of the road. And this is a person who is very, very lucky, because a good Samaritan came by, didn't know who he was, saw him bleeding out, and took him to the hospital. And that's where he woke up. And 4 days later, he woke up. Actually, I don't know if he woke up 4 days later. He was in the hospital for 4 days. Gets out of the hospital, and he goes back to that friend's house because his family and the people who attacked him, although he was near the friend's house and walking to the market, they didn't know where he had come from. So he was safe there probably for a few more days. And that's when he started making his plans to leave the country. So, like I said, he couldn't get the visa to the US, so he goes to Brazil. And if you missed earlier, you can rewind or watch the replay. I described what happened after he got to Brazil. So let's cut to a couple of weeks ago. We have our individual hearing, which is the trial, the first day of the trial. And I go through and I do all the direct examination, asking all these questions. Everything I kind of described to you about his claim I asked him these questions, and those were his responses. And that was, of course, based on his statement. And then the government attorney does the cross-examination and starts, first, as to be expected, asking him, well, why don't you have corroboration? Why don't you have corroborating documents? Corroborating documents or any physical document that can back up your story. In immigration court, you can submit a lot of different things that you can't submit in other courts because of evidence rules or hearsay rules. So you can submit letters from people, from family and friends who knew about it. You can submit letters from dating partners. But the problem was when he was in Ghana, he wasn't open. He wasn't out. He had to keep it in because otherwise what happened to him would have happened earlier. So no one knew until that happened. His person that he really loved and was his partner, he couldn't get in touch with anymore. The guy that he had stayed with, who was a straight man, he disappeared because he was afraid that if they knew that his friend was holding him, he'd get harmed. And so he really didn't have anyone that he could contact to confirm that he was gay. However, the case law says that you don't need corroboration necessarily, especially in asylum, and especially when you have a claim that is unlikely to have documentation. So if you have credible testimony that's consistent and detailed, then if you don't have other documentation, which he did in this case, actually, just not a lot of other documentation, you can still be approved. And then the trial attorney took exception to the fact that his mother didn't write a letter because his mother was the one helping pay for the case, and she did know what happened. She was there that day, and she's the only one who wasn't against it. The problem was his mom didn't read or write. And I've had this issue before in court where I've had a client, there are a lot of people in this world that unfortunately are not able to read and write, and they find someone to help them write the letter and they submit it. And I've had issues where the judges don't accept those letters because they're not here in person to cross-examine. There's no way to call people outside of the US to testify. And they weren't, there's no, especially when they write it in English, there's no guarantee that they know what it said. So we didn't get a letter from his mom because we had all the evidence we needed, and he had such a strong case that it shouldn't have been needed. So, and I was actually honestly worried it could hurt his case because if they don't believe the document is real, it can hurt his credibility. So we didn't want, why bring in a credibility issue when there is none? He was found credible. He was found credible at the credible fear interview, like I said, and I had the actual interview, like all the questions and answers from that, which matched everything he said since then. So we didn't finish the hearing a few weeks ago because it took too long, and they didn't give us enough time. I wasn't honestly expecting to walk into this case and pretty much the government ask him a couple of questions or have me ask a couple of questions and then them say, okay, we're not going to object, or we'll defer to the judge or whatever. I was honestly shocked at how aggressive the attorney for the government was, and a little appalled, to be honest. I kept wanting to object, and I tried objecting to a few of his questions earlier, and the judge overruled them. So you don't want to keep objecting in that situation. You want to let it play out. So it was going to be my turn basically to cross-examine him, but the judge realized the background checks weren't complete, which is, that's for DHS to deal with. And they didn't have time for me to do a redirect, so the judge rescheduled the case for yesterday. I'll get to that in a second. And she left the record open, which meant we could submit more evidence if we wanted. And I walked away from that case that day really feeling something's not right here. Of course, you have to prove you're a member of the particular social group that you claim to be a member of. So if you're gay, the burden is on you to prove you're gay. As I stated, you don't necessarily have to provide any physical documents to prove that. It can be based on your testimony. And my client's testimony was very detailed, and corroboration shouldn't have been necessary. So what the trial attorney kept asking him was about, well, why don't we have a letter of your former partners? Can't get in touch with them. Why don't you have any letters from your current partners? Well, I'm not dating anyone. And he got very specific. He made it very clear, the trial attorney, literally said, I don't believe that you're gay, which he's really not okay. And then he was asking him why he didn't know where gay clubs and bars were, why, basically all this guy did was he came here and he was just kind of waiting for his asylum case to be approved. He was scared to go anywhere because he didn't have lawful status and he had no money to go on dates and pay for, clubs and bars and all that fun stuff. He just didn't have the money. The way he paid us is his mother was paying for it, and his room and board were being provided by a friend of the family. And in return, he cleaned. He did all the housework. He cleaned, he cooked and stuff. And otherwise, he just kind of kept to himself. And there's no requirement that you have any partners, but because he had no partners in the U.S., nobody could come in and testify, yes, he's a gay man. But again, that is not a requirement, and it makes sense that he didn't, it was reasonable why he didn't have that evidence. But the trial attorney kept asking. And then they took issue with this center card that we had. And we directed him to this organization to get help, to get resources, to meet members of his community. And we've had other clients that we've referred there too. And in turn, you have to sign up, you get a membership card, and we submitted that. And the government attorney was like, well, how many times have you been there? And he said, twice. Well, why didn't you go more? And just kind of got on him about it. And we really weren't expecting, if there was going to be an issue in this case, that was not, honestly, I didn't expect any issues, but this was definitely not what I expected. I've done plenty of other cases where asylum is based on being a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and I've never had a trial attorney so aggressive towards the client like this. So like I said, I walked away from it just feeling something was wrong, that this attorney overstepped. And it was hard to judge the judge, where she seemed like he was convincing her. So I was really worried. And I 100% believed my client. I had no reason not to. He was very, like I said, I'm trained to tell if people are telling me the truth or not, and he was definitely telling me the truth. So I spent some time doing some research. And I looked through all the case law, which I already knew made clear that you don't need to corroborate unless you don't, it's easy to get, it's reasonable to get. And if you don't get it, you have to explain why, which he did. Like, my mom can't read or write. Why am I going to have her write me something? My partners, I can't find. I haven't had any. So there was a reason that he didn't have all of the corroborating evidence the government claimed he should have had. And I also felt that the questions were inappropriate. So I ended up finding the UN Human Rights Committee guidelines on asylum claims based on being members of the LGBTQ community. And everything that I was kind of feeling ended up checking out. Basically, this document was incredibly helpful. And I have it right here. If anyone's out there, if anyone's watching, and you can't really see what it's called, but it's Guidelines on International Protection Number 9, Claims to Refugee Status Based on Sexual Orientation and/or Gender Identity within the context of Article 1A2 of the 1951 Convention and/or its 1967 protocol relating to the status of refugees. I will put the name of that in the title in the comment section once I finish the live and post it. But this is a really helpful document for anyone who's in an asylum claim and is based on sexual orientation or gender identity, who is lacking corroboration. And it kind of tells you, it tells the interviewer / decision maker. So in this case, I'm the interviewer, the trial attorney is the interviewer, and kind of the decision maker, but the main decision maker is the judge. It tells them, it kind of goes through how to approach the interview, how to approach the trial, how to approach the decision in a way that makes the person, well, they call them a respondent, we'll say the applicant comfortable, that gives the applicant the best chance of feeling free to talk about it, especially when they came from a country where their entire life or most of their life they had to hide who they were. And now you're asking them to spill everything. So, and to just put it out there in the open, and they may be afraid to do that. They may not know certain terms or certain things they're supposed to do. Like, he had never heard of a gay club until he came to the US. They didn't have them in Ghana. And it says also, like, you can ask about, do you have any relationships or partners, but do not get more specific than that. If the person there's no requirement in the law that you have to have had a partner of the same sex or of any particular sexual orientation or gender identity. It's if the person's credible, you grant them the claim. I mean, this attorney, what bothered me at the trial was before it even began, he literally said to me, right group, right country. The question is he really gay? And I was like, really? I mean, there's a lot of countries where people can make the same exact type of claim, because even in the US, things aren't always great for members of that community. So he kind of was showing that he was biased from the beginning, that he wasn't going to believe him before he even asked him a question, which is all appealable issues. So, and like I said, he kind of went on for a while with him, asking him questions about, well, why wouldn't you go, you're finally free. Why wouldn't you go dating and stuff? And it turns out my client was on some dating apps, but he had no money. So he never followed through. He talked to some men and, even did FaceTimes. We had screenshots, but that's just what it is. So we also, since he was on the dating app, I was like, oh, well, give me screenshots. And we had screenshots. And then we also had him explain in a statement and I had him write this out more for me, but also I wanted the government to see it, to explain, because we were kind of caught off guard by these questions at the other hearing. Because again, his story was so strong that, and there was corroborating evidence that I was honestly surprised that they were going after him like that. So we had him just to kind of explain, look, I don't have money to go out on dates, period. And then to explain, like, that, again, about his mom. And then I told him, look, if we submit a letter from your mom now, it's not going to hold much weight. But if you really wanted to get a letter from his mom, I said, okay, go ahead. So he did get a letter from his mom that said she was actually there the day they dragged him out of the room. So she wrote that, and she wrote that he's a gay man and needs protection. It was written in English, and it was actually a thumbprint was her signature because she legitimately did not read and write. So we submitted that, and then I submitted these guidelines, and I was ready to go today. I was ready. I was fired up because I was really upset after the last hearing. I didn't walk away thinking the judge wouldn't grant it, but I didn't want to take any chances. And I didn't feel like he was being treated fairly. And I knew that this guy cannot afford to lose and have an appeal based on the government acting inappropriately. It's just because you're not getting your money back from the government. It's not fair. So I was really ready. I not only submitted this document, I went through and I highlighted everything that was what I was thinking. Like, I backed me up, saying the types of questions that you should ask and how you should treat the person, and when how you can tell if they're telling, what questions will actually get you the truth versus what questions are just inappropriate and make people uncomfortable. And we sat down to start the hearing, and the judge asked if me and the other attorney wanted to have a conversation. I was like, actually, I would like to talk to the other attorney for a minute. And it just so happened to be that, and this happens a lot in immigration court, that the previous attorney that was at the last hearing that was so aggressive, he wasn't here today. Now, like I said, it was rescheduled to yesterday. And this is another thing I want to point out. If you're watching, why you always need to check, whether it's with your attorney or if you know how to check it yourself, when your court date is, like, consistently, because I always write down, and then I put it in the computer system when the judge tells me the date. So I wrote down 12/7, which was yesterday at 10:30 a.m. Then I tell my client, after I submitted the evidence, make sure you get here, and this was Tuesday, make sure you get here tomorrow at 9 a.m. Get here nice and early. We were going to do a few practice questions for the redirect. And I look on, and he goes, then he writes back and he goes, it's the 8th. And I was like, what? So I go online, and his case is actually one of those cases that are all online now. And it said December 8th at 1 p.m., 1:30, 1 p.m. Yeah, 1 p.m. Yeah. I had another trial 12:30. I'm getting myself confused. So at 1 p.m. And I was like, they never told me this. Like, no one told me. They're supposed to send me a notice. And I was really annoyed. But luckily, I didn't have something else today at 1 p.m. Although a case came in after that started at 12:30 that Aaron had to handle for me today. But just the point of that is, consistently check. I don't mean every day, but even if your hearing is a year from now, every few weeks check, or every month check, and especially if your case is coming up, because it can even be moved earlier in time. And they're supposed to notify me, yes. And if we missed it, yes, we would have been able to file a motion to reopen in the in absentia order, and it would have been granted because they would have been able to prove that we were given notice. But why go through that? So I spoke. So the trial starts today. The judge steps out. I said to the trial attorney, I don't know. I'm sure you were informed of. Thank you, Mensa. So if you're on Instagram, you can see the great job, guys. Fire. So I said, I was like, I don't know what your colleague told you, but I was like, and I did submit documents yesterday, which is kind of late, but the judge didn't give me a deadline, in fairness. I was like, but out of those documents, this is the most important one, this guideline. And I explained, I was like, your colleagues' questions, I honestly should have objected more to. At the time, I felt that they were inappropriate, and I kind of walked away from it feeling uneasy, and I explained all that I just explained and what this document said. And after like 7 minutes straight of me kind of talking and explaining that this is appealable and we will win if you're going to fight us on this, the new attorney says, yes, I did speak to the previous attorney. He explained to me, the situation, and I told him that I was going to defer to the court. And when the government says that, that means you won, basically, because as long as the judge agrees, obviously. So basically, I was only going to have to do this redirect if the judge wasn't going to grant it. So judge comes back. She says, what do you guys want to, counsel, is there anything to tell me? And she was about to have me start my redirect. And I said to the trial attorney, I'm like, I think counsel has something to say, because I wanted to let her say it. And she says to the judge, I spoke to the prior attorney, and we're going to defer. I don't see these issues with credibility. We're going to defer to the court's decision and waive appeal, which means the decision's final. And so the judge goes, well, I didn't have any issues with his credibility at all. She's like, I don't know what the issue was. And I'm looking at my client like, because the judge really didn't indicate either way. And honestly, that's what you're supposed to do. But it freaked me out, because I didn't want this poor guy to have to be sent back to a country where he was literally going to die. So I worked my butt off to find, the best evidence to back me up. And she said the country conditions are in doubt. The case law is very clear that you do not need corroborating documents if you have clear, consistent, and credible testimony. I found that. And then she said that he also had good explanations for why he did not have the evidence, everything that I was thinking. And then she saw the submission too, of course, from yesterday, and asked me, she's like, I was just wondering about, the dating app, they don't have time stamps or date stamps. And I was like, yeah, I didn't. And she said, your client said he wasn't dating. I was like, he doesn't think of being on the dating app as dating. He meant going out on dates. That's why he kept talking about finances. And then I explained, and she had asked me, actually, she goes, did you get this evidence because of what happened at the last hearing? And that's almost like a trick question, because if you don't want to say he went on it, if he went on a dating app to create proof that he's gay, that's not good. But that wasn't the case. But we did only submit it because they questioned it. So I was very honest with the judge. I said, yes and no. No, he had already been on dating apps and whatnot. But yes, I hadn't even asked him about this, because I didn't think this was going to be an issue, and I didn't want it to be an issue, so I submitted it. And then and she said, well, I see that mom's letter is dated recently. Is that the same thing? I said, yeah. And she goes, okay. And then the trial attorney didn't have any objection. She just said, give it the appropriate weight, meaning, it's not as strong evidence because of when it was created. But that was fine. We didn't even need it, according to the judge. I could have just not submitted it. So, so then the judge says, well, I believe he has suffered past persecution and has established a well-founded fear of future persecution. Therefore, I'm granting his asylum case. And I didn't even have to ask my client a single question today. It was fantastic. I love when that happens. And it always seems to happen when I prepare the most. And hey, I would rather prepare more and win than prepare less and lose. And I didn't prepare less for the previous one. I have to use my judgment. And my judgment told me that this is a credible person with a detailed and consistent testimony there, and a reasonable explanation why certain corroborating evidence doesn't exist. No way this will get denied, or no way they're even going to challenge this. I thought they might just consent at the beginning of the hearing last time. And, you know, that's the way court is. You know, it doesn't always happen the way you think it's going to happen. You got to roll with it and do your best. And that's what we did. And, you know, my client was so happy and relieved that he can finally, in his mind, you know, start his life now in the U.S. And he actually just got his work permit last week. He couldn't even get his work permit before because he came in that weird time where you had to be here for a year if you crossed the border illegally. And so he couldn't even get a job before then. So now he can. And, you know, in 9 months, he'll be able to submit his green card application, which he's can't wait to do. And, you know, this is a great lesson for those of you watching. And if there's any lawyers out there watching, especially, to go with your gut. Go with your gut. And when you think there's something wrong, do not be afraid to stand up for what you believe is right. Because, you know, there was something inside of me that knew it was wrong. And I wasn't going to quit until I could prove that. And I was right. And I'm glad I was right because I was able to, you know, change this guy's life. And, you know, now he's free. He doesn't have to worry anymore. And like I said, that some documents, like what I will put in the comments after I'm done here, this can be really helpful to, even though this isn't binding on the U.S., the judges will, this isn't just a random article or even an LGBT group saying what to do, which they could try to claim as bias. This is the UN Human Rights Committee. And this is actually from 2012. And they're saying, look, this is a class of people that need special protections. And you need to make sure you do that, or you may be sending these people back to be seriously harmed or killed. So I didn't even know these guidelines existed until today because I've never had to look for them, but they do. And I'm glad I found them, and I will share that with all of you. So that's all today for notable approvals. I know I am very excited. If I sound tired, I am, because like I said, I was having trouble sleeping, honestly. Not all cases I have trouble sleeping, but it's just the way this attorney acted really kind of got under my skin, because I was afraid he was swaying the judge, but fortunately she was not swayed. So that is all for today. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, and hit that like or follow button. If you found this useful or know someone who may find it useful, click that share button, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.